Hey Tim,
Hello.
how you doing?
Doing good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. How are you? Feeling better again?
Yeah, much better. I was kind of sick last week, but got better over the weekend, so it was good.
That's good.
The the smoke from the west coast of the U.S. has reached the east coast of the U.S. Uh, so like our sun here is really weird looking, which is just like really upsetting. It's I don't know. Hopefully they get some rain soon to take care of things.
Is it orange? Is it like super orange? Like
Not out
what?
here. I mean, it's just kind of like a weird hue, but a friend of mine who lives out in Oregon has said it's hell on earth out there. So I don't know, Mike, if you're dealing with that now.
Oh yeah, I believe Eric probably is too. You're in Pleasanton or Walnut Creek, right?
Danville, but yeah, East Bay, Tri-Valley area. We have blue skies today, so fingers crossed. The ocean wind has been moving stuff off, but that just means it's headed to Vegas or some other
Right.
place, unfortunately. So Colorado for Keenan.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it.
Be ready. We have 2 air purifiers, one working, one on the way.
And we have 3, one on the way. We move them into bedrooms and around the house all day strategically. I got 2 purple air sensors coming in 6 weeks back ordered for the next fire, I guess.
Keenan, don't you have your own fires in Colorado, or have those cleared up?
They're a lot smaller. We had that crazy snowstorm, that 50-degree temperature swing that really helped help them contain them. So they're still there, but they're not. They're controlled at least, or they're not that bad.
That's also a way to clear out the fire with a snowstorm. Cool. Then I don't see Justin yet on the call. Keenan, you are.
Justin's
Justin and
yeah.
Justin and Gabe are both out. Yeah, sorry, Keenan.
Yep.
So then you are the only visitor from product. So I'm handing you Gabe's comment to verbalize, please.
Did you want? I think Gabe asked me to do it. Tim. UX is somewhere between product and something else, so I think it'll do. Yeah, what Gabe wants to talk about is that we dogfood iterations from a process standpoint, and iteration is 1 week time box to which we assign issues.
We should start the recording since we keep forgetting to do that.
It is. It started.
Oh, it is? Cool. Good. All right.
Oh, yeah, it is started. Okay. And yeah, an iteration is a 1 week time box. We assign issues that we want to complete from a done perspective, which means ready for development at start of the iteration to closed by the end of the iteration. So the question is, how do we measure lead and cycle time for issues so we get feedback about whether we're focusing on smaller batch size improvements, smaller batch sizes and improving our lead and cycle times? Sisense is one possibility. How can we efficiently do smaller weekly planning cycles asynchronously? If we want to dogfood iterations, this is arguably the most important initial step to solve for. So I think at this point, it's just open for any thoughts or questions about that.
I mean, I'm sort of confused because if it's a 1 week time box, how could that become smaller or bigger if time is fixed?
Yeah, I think what becomes smaller would be the batch size, and I believe that means there's just the size of the issues is smaller because we're planning in 1 week increments.
So I would expect then that you'd be able to do one incrementally more issues if they're smaller. Or what you could do is look at the changed lines in the diff of the MRs that are linked to the issue, if that's a tight coupling, to actually see the size of the work shrink. Thinking, if there's less scope, there's less code that's having to be changed. But you'd probably need to get to statistical significance to actually see that, because that can be very up and down.
Donald, John, and Jake could be correlated to lines of code and changes. How is it looking in plan reality?
We could. I was actually just looking for this MR, which has come up this week, which proposes that maintainers have asked that we include more context in MRs. In other words, that we don't ship things that are a database change followed by a model change followed by a controller change and so on, that we don't horizontally slice issues, that instead we deliver vertical feature slices. That would naturally encourage growth in MR size if we go ahead with that. In my opinion, also increases the feedback cycle between the time you get a review and the time you start writing code, which is generally, quote unquote, a bad thing. So I just thought that would be of interest, actually, because that's going to directly compete with doing smaller iterations. In terms of measure and cycle time, this common iteration will be the first one for my team, and I'm hoping to do it manually, which is just for the first instance. I know Donald's been doing this manually, and I don't mind doing it manually the first few times, because I think we should feel that pain before we resolve to build something, so we build the right thing and kind of identify which things are causing us the most pain before we build them, if that makes sense.
Just to add to this, we actually had a discussion, like Gabe, he opened an issue with the quality team as well, just to discuss about how to measure lead and cycle time. And the discussion, I'll just give a gist of what the discussion is. It was mainly about the different stages in the product development flow and how long do we spend in each of the stages. And from what it looked like, it sound, I mean, if we really want to measure that, then it seemed like we'll have to check the label events. Like basically, it's all about measuring how long an issue had a particular label and stuff like that, right? So yeah, that's the gist of the discussion that we had. And I've also added the link here, so in case you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, I know from Keenan has an issue at the minute to look into using system notes for one of the North Star metrics. I know that there's some feedback that system note table is enormous, and any join that's done on that table will basically time out before we can get usable data on it. But I've actually used system notes in the past just to quantify when labels were added and removed from an issue. And actually, if you scope down, you can do it through the API, but you have to like apply a lot of filters first. And then, so you in other words, you know in advance which issues you want to track, and then you can grab the system notes quite easily. I mean, it's a bit of work to actually build those scripts, though.
But to clarify on the system note stuff, like that was too large for usage ping, like the speed requirements around usage ping. But if we were using it to measure stuff on .com, like where we're querying, like using analytics, we'd be able to get that stuff.
So we have it on .com for what I'm trying to solve for, but the problem is we can't unify it across self-managed. And so we're trying to get a GMAL representation for portfolio management that's actually showing interactions with the Epic artifact and not just the action of creating. And so that's why we need that additional layer of context. Yeah.
Okay. There's another part to Gabe's question too, about how can we efficiently do smaller weekly planning cycles asynchronously? If we wanted Dogfood iterations, this is arguably the most important initial step to solve for.
I don't want to put Donald on the spot, but I would ask, Donald had talked to me a bit about like how he does the iteration planning, and that might be helpful for like, Donald, how do you, when you're working with your team, kind of determine like what goes into the iteration? Does that like come out of your one-on-ones and then you pull it all together?
Somewhat more asynchronously than that, in that typically at the beginning of a week, so before the start of iteration week, which is a Wednesday. So like on Tuesday, the front-end engineers on a team will take a look at what we have in ready for dev and determine what they want to, what they're going to take on in the next iteration. So then they'll be back and forth throughout Tuesday with me on whether that makes sense, whether we need to scope it down to fit in a week, just what needs to be done on there before we actually commit to it on the Wednesday.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I can't speak for Gabe from the product side. I know like part of the pain that Gabe's representing with that question is like we have 1 week, and if it takes, you know, a 24-hour time frame with everybody across various time zones to kind of get the iteration plan put together, then that's, you know, 17% or whatever of the iteration itself, just kind of getting it planned. So
yeah, and I think he's also referring to the end of cycle time and lead time, in that because the traditional definition of those is the end being you deliver it to a customer. So that means it's been through reviews and it's out on production, and figuring out a way to get all of that done, regardless of how small the iteration is, with our asynchronous nature is a bit difficult, because at minimum, for most things, you have to account for like 2 days just for the review process to go through.
Well, I know the other thing he's mentioned to me in the planning process as well was, because it took that 24-hour lead to do the iteration planning, you weren't really sure what was going to complete in the last iteration. So you didn't know if there's going to be stuff pulled forward into the future iteration. Normally in a synchronous setup, you'd all sit down one afternoon and say, okay, we know exactly where we are now. Here's the next iteration. Being that we're doing this over a 24 to 36 hour time window, we think this is where we're going to be in 36 hours from now. And we're going to plan as if that's right. But if any hiccups come up or anything gets accelerated, we will have made the wrong assumptions going in. So we're starting off not at ground zero when we actually start that. And that makes it a little bit more challenging. And I think that's something we as a company need to overcome with asynchronous work. And it's something that we should then represent to our customers as well as a way of doing it asynchronously. We just need to come up with the best way of going forward with that. So if we are looking at this from a cycle time situation, one of the things iterations is very good at exposing is areas in your process that perhaps are too lengthy or could be improved. And I think what we're seeing now is, to Donald's point, if there's a potential 2-day review process involved with an iteration, what else takes up time? And then we can prioritize, understanding the cycle better. And I think at that point, we may say for asynchronous work, one of the conclusions might be that we need a 2-week iteration instead of a 1-week iteration, just because it doesn't really coalesce in 1 week for us with the nature of our business. I don't know. I think we just need to sort of understand that as part of the output of this.
Could we consider a 1-week iteration a stretch goal? And have there been any concerns that have arisen so far about a 1 week time box.
The traditional 1 week comes from the idea that it's difficult to plan out further than a week and have the end be consistent, because the way things develop in a development environment at a week is sort of when you know if you were successful or not successful, or if new things have come up that need to be planned for. Stretching that to 2 weeks makes that a little bit harder to get that rapid feedback loop. However, in an asynchronous nature, that may be as rapid as we can go. So I think that's one of the things we just sort of need to keep an eye on is synchronously 1 week is the standard, and there's reasons for that. Asynchronously, we may need to look at alternatives. And I think that's perfectly healthy. It's just, we need to make sure we're still getting the benefits of iteration, which is that really rapid feedback.
And start perhaps at 2 weeks and go lower. I'm also torn between what makes it easier, if the longer cycle time make it easier simply because it doesn't feel so cramped and compressed, because this will be really mean that you are like, oh my God, it's planned, and 48 hours later, you're already in the next thinking phase. Or on the other hand, if we just have 1 week, we can rather adapt and change our process faster and learn also not the actual work, but can also iterate better on the process. Not too sure if it's better to start with 2 weeks like we did with releases and deployments. We went from 1 month to 2 weeks to 1 week to 1 day. So I will totally leave this up to you. What sounds the easiest and most flexible?
Yeah, the main reason 2 weeks sounds good to me is the point I think Jake made earlier with the simple, and Donald made a great point too, like just simply because getting issues turned around through maintainer review and review in general in such a short amount of time can essentially guarantee we're going to have a lot of things slip iteration to iteration, which might not be what we're trying to accomplish. And that then with the 24 to 48 hour time cycle it takes to answer questions in a synchronous environment, because the team is so distributed, that 2 weeks it reduces the amount of planning cycles we need for like iterations within a single milestone, and also gives us that window to be able to get things from in dev to verified, maybe a little in a less stringent box. But that's just my thought, my opinion. I'm supportive of whatever we think is going to work for the team.
Yeah, I think to echo Keenan, and I think that's a very good point. I think the idea then is your margin of error when you have a 24 to 36 hour planning window, your margin of error for what gets carried through, it matters less because you have a longer time frame to make up for that potential error at the beginning. And I think given the realities of where we're at with maintainer review, I think we just need to accept that that's where we're at now. Not that we can't look to improve that in the future, but if that's where we're at now, we need to plan around the knowns. And that's one of the knowns is maintainer review in under 24 to 48 hours is just not achievable currently. If that's something that we want to look into, or as an output of this, that would be something we would look to improve to reduce our cycle time further. That's a great output, but I don't think we want to plan to improve all these other aspects in the midst of trying to dog food iterations.
Yeah, so what we've done on the front end team, on the planned front end team, instead of changing the iteration time, we changed the definition of cycle time to mean getting something in review as opposed to getting something merged into production. So that's another approach we could take, just because we have a lot less control over the time it takes once it gets into review. Somewhat, we do have some control over that, but less control than we do the time it actually is in development. So that's another possibility if we want to think about that. The only thing I'm hesitant about with 2 weeks is what's the theory where you fill up the amount of time that you have regardless of the iteration. So I just don't want us to be in a similar situation where we are in Yeah, there you go. Parkinson's law. But a similar situation as we're in with the month-long milestones, which probably won't be because it's half the time, but it may.
I'm hesitant to descope the definition of iteration. I understand why we're doing it. I think it's a very practical approach, but I'm hesitant to descope that because the idea of an iteration is a value add to a customer. And I think when we start descoping that and saying, well, we're going to get it to review, what that means then is we're not actually tracking the most important part, which is actually delivering that value. So we can accrue all the value we want in the engineering side, but if it doesn't actually get delivered, there's no business benefit from that. So I don't know. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm hesitant to be excited about it because I'd like to make sure that we're capturing the intent, which is we see that weekly value delivery and we can actually measure that weekly value delivered.
Could we, thinking of like a world in which we reshape what defines what goes into an iteration by like things that will ship rather than things that are like being like started, I guess, like things that are finishing rather than things that are started. Because like realistically, if a feature slice is you know, of significant value to the customer, it probably takes longer than 1 week to go from like the very beginning to being on production. Because it once it even like, let's say given a very quick 1 day turnaround on review for the reviewer and then the maintainer and then the deployment. So like it waits a day before it goes out to Canary and goes to prod. Like that's 3 days out of your week. I think I agree with what you're saying, Mark, but I've also gotten the feedback from my team around like trying to start something and kind of finish meaning deployed to production in a week is pretty tricky. And I get that the whole a big goal of this dog fooding is to reduce that and make that feel easier. But yeah, those two things are kind of at an impasse. Like having a week with 3 to 4 days of the finishing leaves only, you know, a minority of the time to actually do the work.
My preference, that's why my preference was to make a 2-week iteration, capture the data and understand what percentage of time is spent in each of those phases. And once we understand that better, we can look to optimize the iteration with a goal in the future of perhaps reducing iteration length. Or we decide that for our business case, the iteration length is right where it needs to be. When I've done this in the past, one of the things that usually came out of it was we found bottlenecks in the process, and that's the joy of the iteration is they become very apparent what those bottlenecks are. And then we could decide from a business case, does it make sense to tackle those bottlenecks, or does the business case to tackle them not outweigh the benefit provided by doing so? And we want to then say, okay, are there other areas we could optimize? You do come to a point where you believe your system is as optimized as possible, and you'll revisit it every few months to determine if you still believe that. But there are situations where it's not worth either the financial output or the engineering work or the effort to minimize things further. It just isn't practical. And being asynchronous in nature, I think we have a built-in lag that we don't necessarily want to overcome. That's one of the benefits of GitLab. We don't want to change the culture. So when we get to that limiting factor of the 24-hour turnaround of, you know, the asynchronous nature of our company, I think that's where we have to say that's as good as it's going to get, and we're happy with that. We don't see a need to change that.
You convinced me. I'm cool with 2 weeks. Why don't we start with 2 weeks and then go from there?
Yeah, let's do that. I think it reduces the rush also on the team that feel it could come on top of having something new, and we still can change it then to 1 week. Let's focus on 2. Sounds good. Cool. Then we have 2 weeks, and we have some OKR definitions from Donald too. Do you want to verbalize them?
Sure. Yeah, so I added some dev KRs to this earlier. The first one being 75% of our feature issues that are moved in dev should have an iteration assigned. The hope there is that we encourage usage of iteration within the engineers, which is why I had it as they are moved in dev as opposed to plan breakdown or in the milestone. I don't think we have a way of getting this in platform yet, but we should be able to get the metric in Sisense fairly easily. I had a little bit of a conversation with John around the 75% number. I put 75% knowing that we're getting a late start. And like John said, I still don't, that probably is still not possible because what do we have, 50% of the quarter
Yeah, I
left?
think we're halfway through.
Yeah. So I was thinking of getting the metric first and then adjusting that number depending on what we're at. But the other option that John pointed out was just using the final iteration of the quarter. So I'm not sure which one we want to go to. I think either work. But let's keep it as is for now. Let me see what the number is at currently, and then we can adjust it by next week.
Do we need a script or something to count this? Because I don't think there's any way in the product yet to count it, or is it?
To get the iteration, to get the metric.
To get the percentage of issues basically that are in iterations.
Yeah, I don't know if we can pull that in Sisense already. If it just came for free when we added iterations. Let me look into that. If not, we may need to just model it or make sure that it's coming through into Sisense, which isn't too much effort to do. But this should be something that we build in the platform. So this could be one of the outputs of this working group of that KR. All right, second one I have there is, or we have there is 50% of the plan issues in an iteration is burned down. Just to encourage use of those metrics. We have burn up or getting burn up and burn down charts within iterations. We have them for milestones. I don't know from the engineering side if we really use them all that often. So I think just having this will encourage the usage of that both on the engineering side and on the planning side. And then it also will encourage breaking down of issues into small iteration size, either weekly or bi-weekly work. Scroll down. Any other questions? Jake, you want to verbalize?
Sure. Yeah, I was saying like these. I think these are great. So thank you. I think they'll be good for kind of like forcing us to use iterations. I was asking like if the goal of dogfooding is that we like find and then resolve pain with using these. Do we want to add an OKR that's like around actually fixing stuff that we find, or maybe that's like next quarter's OKRs that we dogfood, dogfood and find a bunch of things that bother us about them, and then we have time to prioritize and fix those sometime. But
I would be more likely to state that the output of this working session is to find potential future improvements rather than focus on fixing those potential future improvements, because I would rather focus on utilizing it and coming up with a plan than trying to plan and execute while in the midst of utilizing. That's, I think, given our time frame, that's probably better for me. But again, I'm very open to the discussion.
I think that can totally also depend simply on the change. I've seen this so many times in the past on the when we did dogfooding in the past. Sometimes just getting rid of 3 clicks that you need to go through by replacing it with 1 click, that's a huge dogfooding win and made everyone's life so much better, and it was an easy and quick win. But it can be also totally like, okay, that we need a complete new dashboard with new data sources. Okay, let's park this somewhere. But there might be really also some nice quick wins that are hidden in there to that when we feel the pain, we just go ahead and get moving on those. I think we we simply take a look and be pragmatic. But I totally agree. We shouldn't be like pushing big features now. The time is too short, and getting the process and the changes in at the same time. But keep our eyes open, and if you feel annoyed, then let's get it fixed. So cool. Then my main suggestion would be looking at time. Let's get this into issues. I will also comment in the Slack channel, and that everyone is updated there, and also in the major OKRs, but that we have the OKRs from each area and can basically link them. Sounds good?
Excellent. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye.